Well, thanks for this invite, Dave. There's nothing I'd rather talk about than leadership in the church. With Parkinson's disease, there is one symptom. It's called the stone face, and so sometimes you're actually smiling inside, but just don't look like it. So if it looks like I'm not smiling, I really am. Well, for the last 2 years, I have been turning down every request to speak outside of our church. I've limited my speaking to inside the church. Yet I wanted to take these requests because, again, there's nothing I'd rather talk about than the church and leadership. But I couldn't. And the only people in my life who knew why I couldn't accept these speaking requests were my wife, my counselor, and my family doctor, and the elders. And the reason began about 2 years ago. It was a fall Sunday morning like any other, probably around 2012 in the fall. And when I say like other Sunday mornings, I had already preached a sermon, the sermon I was about to preach twice, because we have 5 services. So I preached 5:15 on Saturday night and 7 o'clock. So I was very well prepared. I mean, you ought to be prepared after you preach a sermon twice. And so I walk out on the platform that day, but it was like no other day. Because as I was standing on the platform, the lights are dim, and there's an intro to the sermon behind me, and that's kind of how we do it at CedarCreek. My heart started racing, and I had fear and just overcome me. I had old-fashioned stage fright. Now, that's not supposed to happen to somebody that's been speaking for 25 years. I was so scared. I looked at the steps behind me, and I thought, now that would be a good option. But instead, what I did was I just pushed through that talk. And there were some people in the lobby, they talked to me afterwards and said, Lee, you were so passionate at the beginning of that talk. Boy, that was just not like you. Or, I think the word was compassionate. And they said, that's just not like you. And I'm like, if they only knew what was going on. And then the next service went off without a hitch, and the 12:30 went off without a hitch. We give 5 talks. And then it happened to me again on a Saturday, and then every sermon was a hard start for me, where I would come up and I'd have to work through this and I'd have to push through it. And then even staff meetings. I was having stage fright in staff meetings with 10, 11 people. There were a number of staff meetings. The staff, they probably don't remember this, but I just didn't say a word because I couldn't. They probably enjoyed those staff meetings the most. And so I went to the doctor and got meds, so I could get through these talks. And the reason I had to turn down all of these other speaking engagements is because the meds that I was on could be addictive. And so if every time I went to speak I was going to have to take this medication, then I would eventually get addicted, and that would be bad news. And so fast forward 2 years, Dave already mentioned it, I was diagnosed this past March with Parkinson's disease. What I did not know, and most people do not know, is when you have Parkinson's, there are a whole host of symptoms beyond just a tremor, like I have a tremor in my right hand. And one of the symptoms is about 20% of people with Parkinson's have unexplained, out-of-the-blue anxiety. And it hit me in just one spot, public speaking. I have a friend who has Parkinson's disease. He was a pilot. He can't fly a plane anymore because of the anxiety associated with that. My disease, Parkinson's disease, it's a brain disease. It's a lack of dopamine. And so when you have this lack of dopamine, it causes a number of things like tremors and anxiety, which people are surprised by, and depression, which people are surprised by. Robin Williams, who had, bipolar, and then he got Parkinson's on top of that. So he already had anxiety and depression, and then he got anxiety and depression on top of that, and it was, a no-win there. Now I'm on Parkinson's meds and doing much better, and as the dopamine replaces, is sort of replenished, I'll just continue to get better and better. But I don't want to leave you on this Debbie Downer before we get into the talk. I'm not looking for your sympathy, so I'll share a little humor with you regarding this disease. there's about 10 to 20% of the people who get Parkinson's who develop some obsessive compulsive behaviors that are, well, you don't want to develop. And one of them, for example, is gambling. And people have lost their houses. So it's funny on the one hand, and then on the other hand, it's not. Eating, obsessive compulsive overeating, overspending, which my wife says if I get any of these, that's the one she wants me to get, and she wants to be there when I get it. And then there's hypersexualization. Now, I had to well, what's that mean? So my wife's reading out of the book from the neurologist, and she says, oh, you won't believe this. I said, bring it on. And she starts to read how some men with Parkinson's develop a fetish for wearing their wives' lingerie. So I said to her, look, honey, I love your lingerie on you. It will never be on me. Never. All right. So now how do I transition from cross-dressing, which I've only talked about now twice at our church and here. We're just going to jump right into this. 6 mistakes that leaders make. I think you mentioned 9, Dave. It's going to be 6. And this is number 1, which really kind of tailgates off of what we've been talking about. And you wouldn't expect this in a leadership talk, but mistake number 1 is I think leaders are surprised by suffering. Why are leaders surprised by suffering? Because leadership makes us feel rather invincible at times. And you get on this success track, and you have confidence and optimism, and you think it's never going to end. But suffering is a worldwide, common human experience, obviously in varying degrees. It's not evenly distributed. But here's the question for leaders. What do you do when you suffer? What I say is leaders should leverage it for the good, to the best of our ability, instead of being stuck in what I call sick gear, where you just stay put and don't know anything about it. I was privileged to meet the 2-time CEO now of JCPenney, Mike Allman. It was when he had been the CEO just once. He didn't know he was going to be the CEO again. He was meeting with a group of pastors, believe it or not, and he was coaching us. And I don't know if you know this, but Mike Allman from JCPenney, he walks like this. He drags one leg. He looks like he had polio, but he didn't. He had some rare disease that there's just like a few people that have it in the world, a handful of people. And then he was telling us about when he was selected CEO of the company, and he was being introduced, and it sounds like there were a couple thousand people in this auditorium, and he was on the front row, and he was being introduced by the outgoing CEO, and Mike looked at the steps in front of him and was horrified. Because they were high, it was a very high stage, and there were no railings on the steps, and he realized the only way I'm getting up these steps is by crawling up them. He could stand up, but he couldn't get up steps without a railing, not a chance. So what he did was he stood up, and he had a microphone in his hand, and he asked all of these JCPenney employees, he said, I need you to trust me. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes and know you're not going to pray, but just trust me. And so they bowed their heads and closed their eyes, and he crawled up the steps. And he pulled himself up the podium. And then he said, now you can look. And he told them what had just happened. He said, but I didn't want to put you through that. Mike Allman has since been called back as CEO of Penny's to save it, and he did. And now he's out again, wanting to do other things. But he talked about all the life lessons from suffering. Suffering has this unique ability to teach us things that nothing else can. Leaders. It refines us. Here's a passage of Scripture that, if you want to have a theological discussion that goes deep, talk about Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8, which reads, the Son of Man had to suffer to learn obedience. Now, that's beyond me. I don't understand that passage. Why did Jesus have to suffer to learn obedience? Because Jesus was perfectly obedient. So what did he have to learn? Or was it meant to be a model for us? Unless we suffer, there are things we cannot possibly learn as leaders. And then there's the Apostle Paul, who chimes in on this one, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 4 and 5, 3 and 4, somewhere around there. Where he says, the God of all comfort comforts us in our troubles so that we can do what? Comfort others. And so there's that taking something that's terribly painful and hurts us or surprises us and working with God to redeem it. And leaders should do that better than anyone else. All right, second mistake we make. First one, surprised by suffering. Mistake 2 is lack of humility. It was about 10 years ago, I was sitting at a Bob Evans counter and I was reading a book and I began to cry. I wasn't reading the Bible, I was reading a business book. But this wasn't just any business book. It was written by Jim Collins. It's called Good to Great. And the book's a little dated now, but Jim Collins, what he did is he wanted to study the difference between companies that were good over a long period of time versus companies that went from being good to great. And so he told his researchers, he said, do not come back to me and report that it's about leadership. So they came back to him and reported to him it was about leadership. And what they discovered, Jim Collins discovered in these companies that went from good to great while their competitors stayed good, these leaders had what he called them level 5 leaders. And he said they had this rare blend of professional will and personal humility. And you should all have a sheet on your table that has these on it. Professional will, on the one hand, they wanted these leaders, they created superb results, a clear catalyst in the transition from good to great. They demonstrated an unwavering resolve to do whatever must be done to produce the best long-term results, no matter how difficult. Who does that sound like to you? Sounds a little like Jesus to me. He said, I came to seek and save the lost. Jesus was so determined to fulfill his mission. What did he say to Peter? Get behind me, Satan, when Peter tried to get him off track. And then on the other side, personal humility. Now, this is describing leaders. They demonstrated a compelling modesty, shunning public adulation, never boastful. Jesus, think about he didn't, although he was equal to God, he didn't grasp that, the Bible says. But instead he humbled himself and he became a man, as a man, a servant, and a servant unto death. So here's why I was crying. I was crying because I'm reading these about these businessmen and women who went from good to great by doing what? By following the example of Jesus, whether they knew it or not, because most of them weren't Christians. I wanted to stand up in the restaurant and say, you've got to read this. Great leaders are they're taking their cues from Jesus and don't know it. But they would have probably had me arrested. Professional will and personal humility. And then it's no surprise that Collins writes another book, Why the Mighty Fall. Even one of those that had been a great company, their leader left, and that company fell. What do you think is the number one reason why companies fall? It's pride, lack of humility. And he explains it in great detail. And what does the Bible say? What precedes a fall? Pride. My days at 2 Fortune 500 companies, one of them was Sears and Roebuck, and when I was with Sears, honestly, we had conversations. I remember this, numerous conversations where we said, no one will ever pass us. No one will ever beat us. No other retailer can possibly get as large as Sears. That's almost a joke now. Because Kmart did it, and then came this company called Walmart from Arkansas. And blew right by, and now Sears and Kmart are one, and they may not make it. Okay, so the second mistake is lack of humility. Mistake number 3 is underestimating the value of vision. Mission and vision, can we just sort of blend them together rather than debate what the difference between mission and vision? But most people, most organizations, when you ask them, they say, hey, we're good. Yeah. Our people understand our mission, vision, we're good. We got it on the wall over there. Look at that. Andy Stanley, who's a pastor and an author in Atlanta, says that vision leaks Now, at our church, when we're asked the question, why is Cedar Creek so successful, and what is success in the church is something to be debated, certainly. But they're asking about the growth, and I tell them, well, part of it, well, first of all, there's the God factor, which we don't understand. But then there's this commitment, this unflinching commitment to our mission, vision, and values. And living it out and making it clear and not getting into what I call mission drift. And we just took a survey. We've taken the survey a number of times, and there were some things on the survey which I'm going to share with you we didn't do so well on. But on this one, we scored very high on our people own our mission, vision, and values. Now, this is interesting. Collins, again, wrote a book called Built to Last. This is like a Jim Collins talk. And in this book, Built to Last, he asked this question, why did these companies endure for 100 years? And in this case, what he found was this commitment, unflinching commitment to their mission, vision, and values. And get this, it didn't matter if their mission, vision, and values were virtuous or not. That was odd. Now, if you look at, for example, some company, here's Walmart's mission statement. We save people money so they can live better. That's pretty good. And I think Walmart owns that, and they know it to be, their people live by it. Here's Google. Their mission statement is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Okay. Well, I'll leave this other company unnamed because I can't remember exactly the name of the company. But Collins talked about a tobacco company. And he said this particular tobacco company, in their mission statement, it's basically something like, we smoke, we love to smoke, tobacco's great, and everybody should use it. And they were like prideful about smoking, and you weren't on their board if you didn't smoke. Like, do you smoke? No, and you can't work here. And then he goes on to make some other great examples of countries that went to war that had terrible vision statements, mission statements, evil. Some cults do well. You know what the difference is? It's not whether or not you have a mission statement, it's do you live it out? Are you serious about it? Are you committed to it? Because here's what I find. In organizations that I see and study, oftentimes, a mission statement is a paragraph on the wall, and that's about it. Do you own it? Do you live it? That's more important is whether or not it's virtuous. Now, I hope everybody's mission statement is virtuous, but, that's another subject. All right. Here's mistake number 4, weak on personal and professional development. Maybe I'm talking to the choir here because you're here because you want to develop professionally and personally. Dan Ryland, who is the pastor, he's the executive pastor of a church called 12 Stone in Atlanta, Georgia. 12 Stone is a church that was pastored for 7 years by the same pastor. It ran 200 people for 7 years, and now it's a church of 17,000, same pastor, 17,000 with multiple locations. Dan Ryland joined his staff when the church was about 1,500 strong, and Dan Ryland was the right-hand man to John Maxwell, who many of you are familiar with. Dan Ryland has followed John Maxwell wherever he went. He's helped him write his books. He's written some books himself. He's like, I would say, the most respected executive pastor in all of America. And so I got to spend about 3 hours with him with a couple staff members, and we were just pummeling him with questions. We got on the discussion of what we call staff ratio. So how many full-time staff do we have to the number of people that we are currently ministering to? And nationally, the number is most churches have 1 full-time staff to every 60 people. We have 1 to every 120. Therefore, that means we're tired. And so he says, here's the formula. And he didn't write it down for us, but believe me, we wrote it down. He said this. He said, well, here's what's happening to your team. Pressure plus speed equals fatigue request. This is in organizations, corporations too. Pressure plus speed equals fatigue request. Meaning that if they're under pressure and you're going at high speed, they're just getting fatigued from being asked to do so much, and they can only do so much. Now, here's what's interesting. Your best people, if there's not pressure and speed, they'll leave. That's the irony in this. So then he says, here's the answer, and it's development. But this isn't equipping. This isn't like skill development necessarily, although it can be skill development. It's personal development. And what Ryland argues is, if you fill their hearts and their souls, apart from wanting something from them, here's what we do at our church. In fact, he said, you guys are really good at equipping people. I go, well, how do you know that? And he said, well, you have 10,000 people. And so you have to be good at equipping. He said, but equipping, when you equip somebody, you equip them and you say, here, now you're equipped to serve us. Aren't you happy? Or serve in a ministry. Development is different than that. Development goes after helping the person with no strings attached. Corporations or churches. Professional and personal development. I worked for 2 Fortune 500 companies, and I don't remember not one time did we ever do an offsite. Not one time. I don't remember it. Now, then there's the personal development of our own souls that we individually need to be taking care of. I'll never forget when we were talking about working for Sears, I was commuting back and forth between Toledo and Sears for probably about 6 months before my wife and I finally moved. Did I say Toledo? Sears in Chicago. Before we finally moved. And one weekend I was home and I was being a grouch or something, and so she said to me, have you been reading your Bible? I said, I don't want to answer that question. Because I was working a gazillion hours. Because, when I was in Chicago and she's not there, I was working 14, 15, 16 hours a day because I wanted to make an impression, and I was doing little else. All right, so week on personal and professional development. And then the fifth mistake of the 6 that leaders make, this is attributed to Patrick Lencioni, we make leadership too important. The last company I worked for was Montgomery Ward, and Montgomery Ward was actually an acquisition of GE. It was their only failed acquisition, which really probably stuck in the craw of Jack Welch. But when I went to work for Montgomery Ward, the culture shift, I should say the culture shifted for me from Sears to Montgomery Ward, because Montgomery Ward had the GE sort of attitude filtering down. And I was the national advertising manager for their automotive division, and I was making a presentation to the president of Montgomery Ward, Bernie Andrews was his name. And so this was on a Friday afternoon, and we were in what was called the war room, where we have all the competitors' ads around us. And then I had the ads that I'd put together for this particular month or quarter. I forget what the time span was on it. And he looks around, and this is the first time I'd met him. He looks around the room, and he says, get these, and he used the F word and 5 or 6 other explicatives, out of my face, and be back here tomorrow at the same time with a new presentation. Wow. That meant I had to go up to the whole advertising department, like 12 people, and say, nobody's going home tonight. We'll all be here till about 3. And then some of us will have to be back at like 10 in the morning to get the presentation right. That's just how things went at Montgomery Ward. That was sort of the GE way. Jeffrey Emmelt was one of the Leadership Summit guests and scored very high in terms of his talk, except he got dinged by women in particular when he answered the question Bill Hybels had of him, which was, so Jeffrey, we hear that you work a lot of hours and you have a wife and daughter at home. And he said, about 80 hours a week. That's GE's way. So, I don't know about you if you make work too important, but here's what Lencioni says. Let me just back up and say, pastors, we justify it because we're working for God. Lencioni says this, ask your kids, do you think my job or my employees are more important to me than you? Because, teenagers rarely give you good feedback. When you come home, your teenagers rarely say, Dad, oh, you are awesome. Mom, you're the greatest. They usually don't do that, but employees do with leaders. Thank you, you contributed to my life. And All right, so enough of that one. Let's move on to the last one. Mistake number 6. And that is that I missed moving to that one. Okay, make leadership too important. Mistake number 6. We don't ask the legacy question. You remember Covey wrote a book years ago that he popularized this notion of beginning with the end in mind, and he said, actually, go to your own funeral, which seems a little morbid, but anyways, the idea is to go to your own funeral and then imagine what you want people to be saying about you. Well, there's a guy named Bob Buford who wrote a book called Halftime. And he kind of goes in the same direction, but what he says is by your mid-30s and mid-40s, start asking yourself this question, what do you want to be remembered for, and what do you want to accomplish that endures? In other words, what kind of legacy do you want to leave? And so Bob, in his case, by his late 30s, early 40s, he had accomplished all his financial goals. And then he's like, well, what do I do next? Well, he had been exposed to a guy by the name of Rick Warren, who some of us have heard of, and Bill Hybels, who were just in their early days of their ministry, and they were telling people about how to do church, and it's possible to do church differently and be right before God and reach people for Christ and grow them up in Christ. And so they're being asked to speak here and there occasionally. So Bob says to them, you got to take this to the world. And they said, we don't have any money. And Bob says, well, I've got the money. So he ends up selling his company, invests $40 million into this company called Leadership Network, a nonprofit, a company solely to help pastors of large churches. Because he thought, if I can help pastors of large churches like Bill Hybels and Rick Warren and others, and there were these other large churches sort of cropping up, he thought he could have this exponential impact. And so Leadership Network began that way and really exists today in much the same vein. Without them, we wouldn't be in existence. CedarCreek wouldn't be, I shouldn't say that, we wouldn't be where we are. They've helped us tremendously, Leadership Network. Well, now we're talking about, not asking the legacy question. I was just asked to be, I was invited to hang out with Jim Collins, get this for a full day, to sit in a room with him and 15 other pastors. Do you think I accepted that invitation? Are you kidding? Well, here's me and my best friend now, and he knows me by name. He knows me thoroughly if you asked him, yeah. Okay, this is the room we're in, and you can actually see, here's Jim. Here's a guy named Dave Travis who runs Leadership Network now. Here's a guy that was from our church, Mike Mackler, they let me take with me. And then this seat here was mine, and then the seat over here was a guy named Bob Buford on top of Mike's head. Bob Buford, I already mentioned the halftime thing. Well, here's what went down. Jim Collins, after a day of Q&A where we just got to ask him any questions we wanted to ask, and he's brilliant. He's not a believer, but he is so close to being a believer. And the question he asked us as he closed up, he said, so if you're having dinner with Bob Buford and I tonight, and it's just the three of us, what question would you ask us? And so I said, well, I'd want to know, what do you think of us? Jim, I mean, you're a professor and you come out of academia and you're not a Christian, so what do you think of these churches and this organization? And he stared in the ceiling, which he had a habit of doing a lot that day, where he would just look up, and very humble man. And then he said, I would say I've been very impressed with the level of sophistication of these churches and their understanding of who they're trying to reach and how they're reaching them and what to do with them after they reach them. And then he said this, and there were witnesses to this. He said, more so than any business organization I've ever studied. And it was a wow, the 15 pastors that were there, it was kind of a blowback moment where we were just, wow. And then I got to see history, because he takes a piece of paper, I watch him write this, and he sets it in front of Bob Buford. And I can't quote it exactly, but it said something like this. It said, congrats, Bob. It was a big writing. You've made so much of this happen. You're leaving an enduring legacy. Bob Buford is ill right now and may not live through this year. But in that moment, in that time, and that was probably 2 years ago in Boulder, Colorado. Then Collins packs up his briefcase. He leaves. And here's Bob left with this piece of paper, and he holds it up, and he's got tears coming down his cheeks, and his hands are shaking. He didn't have Parkinson's. And his legacy was affirmed. Not that he needed Jim Collins to affirm his legacy, but wow. So what about you? Well, let me just leave you with this, and then I think we're going to go to some questions, some group question time. That was my practicing pressure plus speed earlier, and with Parkinson's, the writing is not good. Anyways, so here's the legacy that we're trying to leave. Somebody drew this life cycle for us and said, this is the life cycle of a church, and he said this to us. He said, every great church dies. I'm like, let's have a fight about that. And then he said, well, let's see, the church in Philippi, the church in Ephesus, the church in Colossae, the church, and Paul was a pretty good church planter, and you're going, oh my, there's something to that. Now, there's really no churches left that Paul planted except the church in Rome, and that's the Roman Catholic Church, and we won't, that's a discussion to have. But a lot of the churches, all of the other churches, we'll say except that one, they've closed. There's nobody there, no Christians there anymore in those spaces. And so he said all great churches die unless you sort of create this new arc of life. You may have to go in a different direction, or you change the scorecard. And so what we decided to do in terms of the scorecard is we said, we don't want to be just Cedar Creek, one big Cedar Creek location. That's not, we want to be, and we don't even want to be just one Cedar Creek, multiple locations. We want to help other churches get started and succeed. And so we are into that knee-deep right now. We've helped a number of churches. I'll just tell you about one in Columbus that we've helped financially launch and coaching them, and it's Chad Fisher in Columbus, a church called Rock City. It's about 3 years old now. It's over 2,000 people. It's the 15th fastest growing church in America. We got to be a small part of that. That's the legacy that we're trying to leave, is like what Jeff Strock calls, instead of one big tree, an orchard, and have exponential impact. So what kind of legacy do you want to leave? Guys, thanks so much for listening. I don't know what I'm supposed to do here next. Am I supposed to direct them to the questions at the table? Okay, and how long do they have for their questions? 15 minutes to discuss the questions? At least that, okay. Did I go too fast? Okay. Okay, and so there's questions you discuss, and then there's Q&A, right? Okay, 15 minutes of discussion questions.
Yes, twice. They have two different books. Lee, one of them's online. The other one is Amplified Leadership.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay. Sounds like you're having some great discussion, but we want to give you some time to also ask questions of Lee, and to segue into that, you were promised that we were going to have 2 door prizes today. These are books that were both recommended by Lee, and so I need, Lee, why don't you go ahead and draw 2 at the same time. 2 at the same time. Yeah, please.
So Pastor Dick Potter wins a book. What
Home
book?
run.
Okay. Oh, this is the gentleman that wrote, Kevin Myers is the one who took the church. He pastored a church of 200 people for 7 years, and now he's pastoring that same church at 17,000. Yeah, it's quite a story. And then Leah Faust.
Leah? Amplified Leadership, Dan Ryland.
And this is the Dan Ryland that I talked about that is the best executive pastor in America. Or at least I think so.
Now, what we're going to do is we'll give Lee a chance to answer your questions, but I'm going to run the mic around to you, give you the opportunity, make sure you speak into the mics because this is being taped. First question, quickly. We have about 15 minutes.
The question is If you have one full-time staff for every 60 people and Cedar Creek has one full-time for every 120, what is the fatigue request? Explain that a little bit, and how do you solve it?
Fatigue request it's just meaning they're tired and fatigued, and so they're saying we're tired and fatigued, and you keep asking us for more. You know, it's like our staff joked at one time and said, it's like the Pharaoh did to the Jews. He said, hey, I want more bricks, but I'm going to give you less hay. And so our staff feels like, gosh, you know, sometimes we have less and less staff, but more to do. And so we can't hire more because we don't have the money, but they rate us so high on our mission, vision, and values, that's what keeps them going. But on the downside, we haven't been developing them as well as we should have. We've been equipping them, but not developing. And so we're working harder at developing and building, expanding their heart and building into their life.
Thought I saw some hands back here. There we go.
Hi, Tom Mullins, First Baptist Bowling Green. What would you suggest should be our plans to have in place for our personal and professional development?
Well, I think that's so broad. I would just say this. For the personal development, there's you have to have a devotional life. And so there's a lot of ways to do that. But I would read people like Wayne Cordero, who has he has a very disciplined way to do that. I think then the Dallas Willard's book, you know, Spiritual Disciplines, Foster, and others who are that talk about the spiritual disciplines. So that would be on the professional or personal side in terms of you know, in terms of your devotional time and things like that. Then on the professional side, I would find people who you admire that are doing what you'd like to be doing, that you look at them and say, that's where I'd like to be. And I would read those folks. Like, for example, Kevin Meyer's book, this is a guy who, that story needs to be told all over America because he pastored a church for 7 years at 200. So what happened to him? I actually had dinner with him one time where we were talking about that a little bit. He did have a little help. He had John Maxwell disciple him. So that helped a little. But on the professional side, I think become a ferocious reader and learner and an observer. What we do with our staff is, like, we go and visit other churches that are, we think churches doing things that we find out they're doing, you know, it's like we visited North Point, we visited 12 Stone in Atlanta here recently. We've been to probably, gosh, I would say as a staff, probably over the years, we've probably visited 30, 40 different churches and talked to their staffs. We meet with their staffs if they'll meet with us and pick their brain.
Others?
My name is Justus Musioka. I'm a student in Weinbrenner Theological Seminary. I'm also a member of CedarCreek Church, and I am a missionary from Kenya to the United States together with my wife. Number 6 is of particular concern for me. It says, leaders forget to ask the legacy question.
Yes.
What would you say to the American church where, as we travel around, we see churches where young people are not prepared for future leadership? What do you say to the American church about the legacy that they are leaving a country without people to take over the church when the current generation of American Christians is too old?
Yeah. Well, of course, Justice, that's a huge question. But I would say, to simplify the answer, what we're doing in our small part of it is that we have an internship program where we're working with young people and giving them ministry opportunities, and we are developing them. We're not just equipping them. And so I would say if gosh, here's a crazy answer. If every church in America had an internship program where they were equipping and developing young people, that's a powerful, that's just off the top of my head. There's a lot more to discuss about that.
How many?
How many what?
How many young people?
Oh, right now on our internship, there's 20 in that, and we're pretty selective. We have a significant number. But like right now, okay, so Ben, who else here was an intern? All the interns, stand up for a second. We're interns. Okay, so these guys were all interns. And where else? They were all interns, okay? Now they're campus pastors and cinematographers and administrative leaders, but these were all interns in our church who are now in our church as leaders.
How long's your intern program?
It's a 1 year plus a second bonus year for those who hit a certain, we invite to stay for 2 years. So.
How long have you been doing it?
How long have you been doing it? Ben, do you know? Well, he was the first intern. One thing is we went to a Leadership Network event and they asked, so how are you developing leaders in your church? And we went, gosh, most of our young leaders have come out of our internship program, and we had suspended it for a while. We're like, are we stupid? And so we, fired it back up, and so, yeah. And the quality of the people that you just saw stand up is pretty extraordinary.
Other questions? We'd like to express.
This isn't. Did you say this is not a fair question?
We like those.
Yeah.
I'm preloading here a little bit. Will you talk about how you leverage the Leadership Summit? I have had the privilege of watching, Dr. Draper here create an opportunity for people to learn in this community, and I've been a part of the Leadership Summit for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I think it's your vision that really started all of this. Talk about how you leverage it for the organization and the benefit that it adds to the community around us, because I think that has been something that's been key for the leadership development of our staff and our community.
Yeah, well, the summit, we've been going, before we hosted the summit, we went to the summit, and we knew it's one of those times where you get away and you develop people, because we could not do what they were doing at the summit, the quality of leaders they were providing. And I would say even the summit for our church was catalytic in making probably one of the greatest changes in the history of our church. And we didn't know that was going to happen. We went to a summit, came away and said, we have to do this. And so that's one thing, is you just go, and because you go, God serendipitously, supernaturally surprises you. The other thing is, just making sure your staff are going. And, we try to, and we talk about it and share back and forth about the books that we read. And is that the right answer, Ben? That was good? That was good enough? All right.
Lee, one of the comments that you made was that you devour books voraciously, and that to be a good leader that you recommend that. We as Americans love having full plates.
Yeah.
And we love entertainment, we love TV, we love sports, we love a lot of things, and it's hard for us to shove that off.
Right.
How do we reprioritize, and how do we count the cost of that?
Yeah, well, you know what? I think I love Covey, begin with the end in mind, and that's heavy. And then you have Buford, who says, think about what kind of legacy you want to leave. I just switched gears with people and said, I've decided, I've been asking the question and I've settled it. And the question I've been asking since I've been diagnosed is my role as a pastor, is my primary role teaching people how to live or teaching people how to die? And it's probably more teaching people how to die, because there's as many verses on dying to self as, the abundant life even that Jesus talks about, embedded in that is dying to self. He also said, take up your cross. So I would say goal first, what's your goal? And then how can you, if reading, we have a guy on our staff who is one of the most courageous men I know, just got back from a third world country, sneaks into the country with other guys on our staff, teaches Bible studies in other languages, risks his life, and he does not like to read. So reading, but he likes to listen to podcasts and things like that, and so there's other ways to develop too. And he runs our internship program as well. Does that answer that? Is that okay? All right.
Lee, I just want to say thank you. I remember the day that I called and said we're thinking about doing the Global Leadership Summit, and knew that we were in your backyard, and there wasn't a moment's hesitation when you said go for it.
Right.
And we'll support you. And so we say thank you, because that's helping establish a legacy here. Also, thank you for just coming to speak to us, considering all that's going on in your life, and for your leadership in the kingdom. We appreciate it and
Thank
say
you.
thank you.
Thanks,
Let's
Dave.
thank Lee.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.